All right, let's talk about something that's probably crossed your mind more than once. Are you living your life on time? Today, we're going to dig into why that pressure to act your age isn't just outdated, it's pretty much a complete myth. So let's just dive right in. Have you ever had that feeling? Maybe you're at a wedding or just scrolling through your phone, and you suddenly feel like you're off schedule? That nagging question of whether you're ahead of the curve or maybe falling behind in life? Well, that's exactly what we're getting into. I mean, we hear it all the time, right? Act your age. But seriously, in a world where a 70-year-old can be a college freshman and a 30-year-old might be on their third career change, what does that phrase even mean anymore? Well, it turns out there's this invisible script that's been kind of directing our lives all along. It's this powerful, unwritten set of rules that tells us when we should be hitting all those big life milestones. This is exactly what creates that feeling of being on time or off time. And it's a phenomenon that, believe it or not, psychologists have a name for. So, what is this invisible force? Psychologists call it the social clock. And this is the first big idea we really need to wrap our heads around. Just think of it like society's pacemaker, setting the rhythm for our entire lives. This whole concept, which comes from a sociologist named Bernice Newgarten, finally gives a name to that pressure we all feel. The social clock is basically society's unwritten schedule for when we're supposed to get married, have kids, buy a house, and hit all those other major life beats. And look, when we're in sync with this clock, everything feels right. We feel like we're on track. But when we're not, when we experience what psychologists call an off-time event, man, it can be incredibly stressful. It's that feeling you get when all your friends are getting engaged and you're still swiping, or when you're starting a new career at an age when everyone else is thinking about retirement. As Newgarten herself put it, we don't just know about this clock, we totally internalize it. We carry it around in our heads and use it as a ruler to measure our own life's progress, a lot of the time without even realizing that's what we're doing. But here's the kicker. This clock isn't set in stone, not at all. Just look at the age of marriage in the US. In the 1960s, people were tying the knot in their early 20s. Fast forward to 2021, and that age has jumped by almost a decade. So the social clock is constantly being reset. So, if society's clock is always changing, what does that mean for our own internal sense of time? Okay, this is where things get really personal and frankly a lot more interesting. And that brings us to this idea of subjective age. This has nothing to do with the number of candles on your cake. It's all about the age you feel, the age you act, the age you see staring back in the mirror, and maybe even the age you wish you were. It's your own personal age identity. Just think about it for a second. How old do you actually feel? Research consistently shows that as people get older, the vast majority of us feel younger than our actual chronological age. This disconnect between our calendar age and our felt age is super common. And here's a really powerful example that shows just how big this gap can be. Let's take a 10-year-old kid with ADHD. So chronologically, they are 10 years old. Simple enough. But according to something called the 30% rule, their executive functions, stuff like planning, impulse control, managing emotions, they might be operating at a level that's much closer to that of a 7-year-old. That's a huge gap between their chronological age and their actual developmental age. So what about that in-between feeling that so many of us go through, especially in our 20s? Well, it's become so widespread that psychologists have actually identified it as its own distinct stage of life. It's called emerging adulthood, a term coined by psychologist Jeffrey Arnett to describe the period from about 18 to 29. And it's important to know, this isn't just delayed adulthood. It's seen as a unique, exploratory period of our lives. Arnett actually lays out 5 key features of this stage. First, it's all about identity exploration, really figuring out who you are. Second, it's an age of instability. You're changing jobs, apartments, relationships. Third, it's a time of self-focus, of concentrating on personal growth. Fourth is that classic feeling of being in between, not a teen, but not quite a full-on adult either. And finally, and I love this one, it's an age of possibilities, a time of huge optimism about the future. Okay, but we have to make a really crucial distinction here. This healthy period of exploration is completely different from what psychologists call arrested development, which is when a person's emotional growth gets, stuck. Think of it this way. Emerging adulthood is a productive journey, a bridge that leads to maturity. Arrested development, on the other hand, usually stems from things like trauma or unhealthy parenting, and it results in an inability to really handle adult life. So one is a bridge to adulthood, the other is like being emotionally frozen in the past. So where does all this leave us? What's the big takeaway here? It's that the rigid timelines and the strict life stages that governed our parents' and grandparents' generations, they're starting to dissolve. The lines are just getting blurrier. We're living in what some sociologists call a fluid life cycle. And what that really means is people are starting careers, families, and going back to school at wildly different ages. Your chronological age is just becoming a really poor predictor of what you're actually doing with your life. And what's so amazing is that Bernice Newgarden, the very person who came up with social clock theory, she predicted this was going to happen all the way back in the 70s. She saw us moving toward an age-irrelevant society, where your birth year just tells us less and less about who you are. And that leaves us with one final, and I think really empowering thought. If that universal social clock is fading away, who gets to set your timeline? The only clock that truly matters is the one you set for yourself. The power to define the pace of your own life, well, that's now more in your hands than ever before.